What's up, kids ministry leaders? So we know kind of from my last video or from somewhere maybe you read in the Bible or maybe you heard it at church somewhere, we know that we have God's Spirit living in us, the Holy Spirit. And that's pretty awesome. So when it comes to loving people and following Jesus, we don't have to perform and be the best possible Christians because God has given us the Holy Spirit. So for me as a believer, I know in my head that I have God's Spirit, but it feels a lot of times that I don't rely on Him. For example, a couple weeks ago, I was co-leading our small group with my wife, Jess, and I found myself feeling really insecure, thinking a lot about myself and maybe just how everyone else was perceiving me. And I know insecurities are normal, but I also know that God doesn't want me to live in insecurity. He wants me to live in confidence. So what's the gap? I know I have the Holy Spirit, but it seems that I'm not relying on Him, or maybe the strength that He wants me to have. So I think that it's possible for us to have the Spirit of God living in us and for us not to rely on Him. I want to read you guys a verse from Galatians. So it's Galatians 3:2, and Paul says this: "Let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith?" The context here is when Paul's writing to the Galatians, he's calling them back to just a fundamental relationship with God. They thought for a while that they could love other people and live the life that God was calling them to just by, trying harder. But Paul was telling them that that would never work, that Jesus is actually calling them to an impossible life and that they don't have that kind of strength. Instead of trying harder, Paul was calling them to depend on God by faith. He knew that the Galatians had an intellectual understanding that God was God, just like a daughter can know that her dad is her dad. But Paul was calling them to trust God, to have faith, just like a daughter trusts her dad by holding his hand. So the way that we rely on the Holy Spirit is by faith. It's kind of like this handy illustration that I learned back in college from some mentors of mine. I got a glass of milk, and this glass of milk is a person's life apart from Christ. It's just them. They're this good old glass of milk. But when someone believes in Jesus, something changes. God comes and He puts His Spirit inside of them. And you guys know that the Holy Spirit, or that Hershey syrup, is a great illustration for God's goodness. But when God's Spirit comes and lives in someone, like, yes, this glass of milk has chocolate syrup. However, it kind of just sits there. They have it, but it's not necessarily doing what it was meant to do. They kind of believe in one sense, but they're not really trusting God. It has to be stirred up. And the way that stirring happens is through the straw of faith. So this straw is like faith in a believer's life. When they believe in what God says and in His promises, it's like stirring the glass of chocolate milk. And man, this is a lot better. Obviously, I'm a slow stirrer, but you kind of get the idea. It's the same for our lives. When we continue to believe the promises that God gives us, when we set our mind on Him, He gives us His power and strength. And that's the faith that stirs the glass. Because then we can point back to the good things that we've done, and we could say, that was God's power, not my own. So for me, leading small group, for example, I think it's remembering and believing what Jesus said in John 15 when He said, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him, he will bear a lot of fruit." It's not about how good I do. It's about believing that Jesus can bear fruit through a broken guy like me. Love you guys, and I'll see you soon.